Chapter 8. The Law of Intuition. Leaders evaluate everything with a leadership bias. During the decade that I've spoken to audiences about the 21 laws of leadership, I found that the law of intuition is the most difficult to teach. When I talk about it, natural leaders get it instantly, learned leaders get it eventually, and non-leaders just look at me blankly. Leaders look at things differently than others do. They evaluate everything according to their leadership bias. They possess leadership intuition that informs everything they do. It is an inseparable part of who they are. Everybody is intuitive. Not all people are intuitive in the area of leadership, but every person possesses intuition. Why do I say that? Because people are intuitive in their area of strength. I'll give you an example. Because I am a communicator and do a lot of public speaking, people occasionally want to hear from my wife, Margaret, and she receives an invitation to speak at an event. As the date approaches, Margaret works on her presentation and puts together her notes. But we inevitably end up having a conversation something like this. "John, how do you think I should start?" she asks. "It depends," I answer. "That's not much help." "Margaret, I'm not trying to be difficult. Every speaking situation is different." "Okay, but what would you do?" "Well, I'd go out and talk to many of the attendees before the event to try to get a feel for who they are. Just check out the room. And I'd listen to what the host said and to the people who spoke before me to get an idea if I should play off something they said or that happened earlier. I'd find a way to really connect with the audience." "That doesn't help me," she answers in frustration. To be honest, her questions frustrate me as much as my answers frustrate her. I have a hard time explaining what I would do because communication is intuitive for me. It's one of my greatest strengths. Turning the tables. I'm not picking on Margaret. She is more highly talented than I am in most areas. To give you an idea, when I'm getting ready to speak at an event and I'm trying to pick up my clothes, I'm worthless. One of two things usually happens. I stand in the closet, paralyzed and drooling, totally incapable of figuring out what goes together. Or I pick something out, put it on, go into the bedroom, and Margaret says, "Oh, John, you're not going to wear that, are you?" No, of course not," I answer. "What do you think I should wear?" At that, Margaret strolls into the closet and looks around for about 2 seconds. "I haven't seen you in this jacket yet, so how about this?" she says as she starts grabbing things. "And if you wear this shirt and this tie, it will really pop." As she picks the slacks, I try to be helpful and pick out shoes. "No, you can't wear those shoes with this," she says. "Here, wear these and the belt." When I am at the event, I hear compliments about how I'm dressed. So when I return home, I hang that whole outfit together in the closet because I know it goes together. Then, the next time I get ready to leave for a speaking engagement, I put it on and walk confidently into the bedroom. Margaret says, "You can't wear that again." And off we go through the whole routine again. Margaret has incredible instincts when it comes to anything artistic. She has a great sense of style and a fantastic eye for color. She can paint, arrange flowers, design, hunt down fine antiques, garden, decorate, you name it. She is intuitive in the areas of her strengths. Thanks to her, our homes have always been gorgeous. She could easily hold her own against any decorator on HGTV. I'm lucky because I benefit from her talent. More than facts. Intuition is so difficult to explain because it's not concrete. It doesn't rely on just empirical evidence. If you've ever seen reruns of the old show Dragnet on TV Land, or if you're my age and saw them when they were new, you probably know the phrase Jack Webb made famous. Just the facts, man. Just the facts. The law of intuition depends on so much more than just the facts. The law of intuition is based on facts plus instinct plus other intangible factors, such as employee morale, organizational momentum, and relational dynamics. Colin Powell, retired Army General and former Secretary of State, provides a good explanation of the use of leadership intuition and its importance. He observes that many leaders have trouble if they desire to have an exhaustive amount of data or wait to have all their questions answered before making decisions. Powell says that his practice is to make a leadership decision after gathering only 40 to 60% of the information that can be obtained, and then he uses his experience to make up the difference. In other words, he bases his leadership decisions as much on intuition as on the facts. He relies on the law of intuition, and that often separates the great leaders from the merely good ones. Leadership is their bias. Good leaders see everything with the leadership bias, and as a result, they instinctively, almost automatically, know what to do when it comes to leading. This read and react instinct is evident in the best leaders. For example, consider the career of another former U.S. Army General, H. Norman Schwarzkopf. Time after time, he has assigned commands that others avoided, but he was able to turn the situations around as a result of his exceptional leadership, intuition, and ability to act. Leaders are often able to do similar things. When Schwarzkopf had been in the Army 17 years, he finally got his chance to command a battalion. It occurred in December 1969 during his second tour of Vietnam as a lieutenant colonel. The command, which nobody wanted, was of the 1st Battalion of the 6th Infantry, the first of the 6th. But because the group had such a horrible reputation, it was nicknamed the worst of the 6th. Confirming this was the fact that as he took command, Schwarzkopf was told that the battalion had just flunked its annual inspection with an abysmal score, only 16 out of a possible 100 points. He had only 30 days to whip his men into shape. Seeing through a leadership lens. After the change in command ceremony, Schwarzkopf met the outgoing commander. Before the man left, he told Schwarzkopf, "This is for you," handing him a bottle of scotch. "You're going to need it. Well, I hope you do better than I did. I tried to lead as best I could, but this is a lousy battalion. It's got lousy morale. It's got a lousy mission. Good luck to you." Schwarzkopf anticipated a terrible situation, but it was even worse than he expected. His predecessor hadn't known the first thing about leadership. The man had never ventured outside the safety of the base camp to inspect his troops, and the results were appalling. The entire battalion was in chaos. The officers were indifferent. The most basic military security procedures weren't being followed, and soldiers were dying needlessly. The departing commander was right. It was a lousy battalion with lousy morale, but he didn't realize that it was largely his fault. During the next few weeks, Schwarzkopf's leadership intuition kicked in, and he took action. He implemented procedures, retrained the soldiers, developed his leaders, and gave the men direction and a sense of purpose. When it was time for the 30-day inspection, they achieved a passing score, and the men started to think of themselves. Hey, we can do it, right? We can be a success. We're not the worst of the 6th anymore. As a result, fewer men died, morale rose, and the battalion started to become effective in its mission. The battalion's turnaround was so strong that just a few months after Schwarzkopf took it over, it was selected to perform more difficult missions, the kind that could be carried out only by a disciplined, well-led group with strong moral. Who you are determines what you see. How was Schwarzkopf able to turn around his group of soldiers? The same way he overcame difficult assignments again and again, the law of intuition. Other officers had the same training and access to the same resources, and Schwarzkopf wasn't necessarily smarter than his counterparts either. What he brought to the table was strong leadership intuition. He saw everything with a leadership bias. Who you are dictates what you see. A scene from the movie The Great Outdoors illustrates this perfectly. In the movie, Chet, played by John Candy, is vacationing with his family at a small lake community in the woods. He is unexpectedly visited by his sister-in-law and her husband, Roman, played by Dan Aykroyd. As the two men sit on the porch of their cabin, overlooking the lake and miles of beautiful forest, they start to talk. And Roman, a fast-talking wheeler dealer, shares his vision with Chet. I'll tell you what I see when I look out there. I see the underdeveloped resources of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I see a syndicated development consortium exploiting over $1.5 billion in forest products. I see a paper mill, and if the strategic metals are there, a mining operation, a green belt between the condos on the lake, and a waste management facility. Now I ask you, what do you see? I just see trees, answers Chet. Well, says Roman, nobody ever accused you of having a grand vision. Chet saw trees because he was there to enjoy the scenery. Roman saw business opportunities because he was someone whose desire was to make money. How you see the world around you is determined by who you are. How leaders think. Because of their intuition, leaders evaluate everything with a leadership bias. People born with natural leadership ability are especially strong in the area of leadership intuition. Others have to work hard to develop and hone it. But either way, intuition comes from two things: the combination of natural ability, which comes in a person's areas of strength, and learned skills. It is an informs intuition, and it causes leadership issues to jump out to a leader in a way they don't with others. I regard leadership intuition as the ability of a leader to read what's going on. For that reason, I say that leaders are readers. Leaders are readers of their situation. Today, I wear many hats. I write, speak, mentor, and network. I also own 2 companies. Although I speak with the presidents of my companies on a weekly basis, they run the day-to-day operations, and I go to the office only occasionally. Recently, John Hull, the president and CEO of Equip, commented, "John, when you come into the office, you enter our world very easily." I thought that was an interesting choice of words, so I asked what he meant. "You are very aware of the atmosphere and environment," he explained. "You ask good questions and quickly fall in step with us on our journey. It's never awkward when you return to the office." As I reflected, I realized what he was describing was my use of leadership intuition. In all kinds of circumstances, leaders pick up on details that might elude others. They tune it to leadership dynamics. Many leaders describe this as an ability to smell things in their organization. They can sense people's attitudes. They are able to detect the chemistry of a team. They can tell when things are humming and when they're winding down or getting ready to grind to a halt. They don't need to sift through stats, read reports, or examine a balance sheet. They know the situation before they have all the facts. That is the result of their leadership intuition. Leaders are readers of trends. Most followers are focused on their current work. They think in terms of tasks at hand, projects, or specific goals. That is as it should be. Most managers are concerned with efficiency and effectiveness. They often possess a broader view than employees, thinking in terms of weeks, months, or even years. But leaders take an even broader view. They look years, even decades ahead. Everything that happens around us does so in the context of a bigger picture. Leaders have the ability and responsibility to step back from what's happening at the moment and to discern not only where the organization has been, but also where it is headed. Sometimes they can accomplish this through analysis, but often the best leaders sense it first and find data to explain it later. Their intuition tells them that something is happening, that conditions are changing, and that trouble or opportunity is coming. Leaders must always be a few steps ahead of their best people, or they're not really leading. They can do that only when they're able to read trends. Leaders are readers of their resources. A major difference between leaders and everyone else is the way they see resources. A good worker encounters a challenge and thinks, what can I do to help? A high achiever asks, how can I solve this problem? A peak performer wonders, what must I do to reach the next level so that I can overcome this? Leaders think differently. They think in terms of resources and how to maximize them. They see a challenge, problem, or opportunity, and they think, who is the best person to take this on? What resources, raw materials, technology, information, and so forth do we possess that will help us? What will this take financially? How can I encourage my team to achieve success? Leaders see everything with a leadership bias. Their focus is on mobilizing people and leveraging resources to achieve their goals rather than on using their own individual efforts. Leaders who want to succeed maximize every asset and resource they have for the benefit of their organization. For that reason, they are continually aware of what they have at their disposal. Leaders are readers of people. President Lyndon Johnson once said that when you walk into a room, you don't belong in politics if you can't tell who's for you and who's against you. That statement also applies to any other kind of leader. Intuition helps leaders sense what's happening among people and know their hopes, fears, and concerns. They can sense what's happening in a room, whether there's curiosity, doubt, reluctance, anticipation, or relief. Reading people is perhaps the most important intuitive skill leaders can possess. After all, if what you are doing doesn't involve people, it's not leadership. And if you aren't persuading people to follow, you aren't really leading. Leaders are readers of themselves. Finally, good leaders develop the ability to read themselves. Poet James Russell Lowell observed, no one can produce great things who is not thoroughly sincere in dealing with himself. Leaders must know not only their own strengths and blind spots, skills, and weaknesses, but also their current state of mind. Why? Because leaders can hinder progress just as easily as they can help create it. In fact, it's easier to damage an organization than it is to build one. We've all seen excellent organizations that took generations to build begin falling apart in a matter of years. When leaders become self-centered, pessimistic, or rigid in their thinking, they often hurt their organizations because they are likely to fall into the trap of thinking they cannot or should not be changed. And once that happens, the organization has a hard time becoming better. Its decline is inevitable. 3 levels of leadership intuition. If you're saying to yourself, I'd like to be able to read these dynamics in my organization, but I just don't see things intuitively. Don't despair. The good news is that you can improve your leadership intuition, even if you are not a natural born leader. As I've already mentioned, leadership intuition is informed intuition. The less natural leadership talent you have, the more you will need to make up for it by developing skills and gaining experience. They can help you to develop thinking patterns, and thinking patterns can be learned. I found that all people fit into three major intuition levels. Number one, those who naturally understand leadership. Some people are born with exceptional leadership gifts. They instinctively understand people and know how to move them from point A to point B. Even when they're kids, they act as leaders. Watch them on the playground, and you can see other kids following them. People with natural leadership intuition can build upon it and become world-class leaders of the higher caliber. Number two, those who can be nurtured to understand leadership. Most people fall into this category. They have adequate people skills, and if they are teachable, they can develop intuition. Leadership can be learned. However, people who don't try to improve their leadership and never work to develop their intuition are condemned to being blindsided to their leadership for the rest of their lives. And number three, those who will never understand leadership. I believe nearly everyone is capable of developing leadership skills and intuition, but occasionally I can run across someone who doesn't seem to have a leadership bone in his body and who has no interest in developing the skills necessary to lead. This isn't you because these people never pick up a leadership book. Developing intuition by changing your thinking. Several years ago, I gained insight into college football and about how quarterbacks are trained to think when I was invited to the University of Southern California. Their coach at the time was Larry Smith. He asked me to speak to the Trojans football team before a big game and also allowed me to visit the team's offensive war room. On chalkboards covering every wall, the coaches had mapped out every possible situation their team could be in, according to down, yardage, and place on the field. And for every situation, the coaches had planned a specific play designed to succeed, based on their years of experience and their intuitive knowledge of the game. While I was there, I noticed a cot against one of the walls. When I asked what it was for, the offensive coordinator said, "I always spend Friday night here to make sure that I know all the plays, too." "Yeah, but you've got all of them written down on that sheet that you'll carry with you tomorrow on the sidelines," I said. "Why don't you just use that?" "I can't rely on that," he answered. "There isn't time. You see, by the time the ball carrier's knee touches the ground, I have to know what play to call next based on the situation. There's no time to fumble around deciding what to do." It was his job to put the coaching staff's intuition into action in an instant. But the coaches didn't stop there. The 3 USC quarterbacks had to memorize every one of those plays. The night before the game, I watched as the coaches grilled those young men, firing one situation after another at them. The job of the quarterbacks was to recite which play was right for the situation. The coaches wanted those players to be so well informed, so ready, that their intuition would take over during crunch time. It would help them to effectively lead the team. Leaders solve problems using the law of intuition. Whenever leaders face a problem, they automatically measure it and begin solving it. Using the law of intuition, they evaluate everything with a leadership bias. For example, leadership intuition came into play in recent years at Apple Computer. Just about everybody knows the success story of Apple. The company was created in 1976 by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in a garage. Just 4 years later, the business went public, opening at $22 a share and selling 4.6 million shares. It made more than 40 employees and investors millionaires overnight. But Apple's story hasn't been all positive. Since those early years, Apple's success, stock value, and ability to capture customers have fluctuated widely. Jobs left Apple in 1985, having been pushed out in a battle with CEO John Sculley, the former Pepsi's president, whom Jobs had recruited in 1983. Sculley was followed by Michael Splender in 1993, and then Gilbert Amelio in 1996. None of them was able to re-establish Apple's previous success. In its glory days, Apple had sold 14.6% of all personal computers in the United States. By 1997, sales were down to 3.5%. That was when Apple again looked to the leadership of its original founder, Steve Jobs, for help. The failing company believed he could save it, reinventing Apple. Jobs intuitively reviewed the situation and immediately took action. He knew that improvement was impossible without a change in leadership, so he quickly dismissed all but 2 of the previous board members and installed new ones. He made changes in the executive leadership, and he fired the company's ad agency and held a competition for the account among 3 firms. He also refocused the company. Jobs wanted to get back to the basics of what Apple had always done best: use its individuality to create products that made a difference. At the time, Jobs said, We've reviewed the roadmap of new products and axed more than 70% of the projects, keeping the 30% that were gems. Plus, we're adding new ones that are a whole new paradigm of looking at computers. None of those actions were especially surprising, but Jobs also did something that really showed the law of intuition in action. He read Apple's situation and made a leadership decision that went absolutely against the grain of Apple's previous thinking. It was an incredible, intuitive leadership leap. Jobs created a strategic alliance with the man whom Apple employees considered to be their arch enemy, Bill Gates. Jobs explained, I called Bill and said Microsoft and Apple should work more closely together. But we have this issue to resolve, the intellectual property dispute. Let's resolve it. They negotiated a deal quickly, which settled Apple's lawsuit against Microsoft. Gates promised to pay off Apple and invest $150 million in non-voting stock. That cleared the way for future partnership and brought much needed capital to the company. It was something only an intuitive leader would have done. Apple's stock value immediately went up 33%, and in time, Apple regained some of the prestige it had lost over the years, revolutionizing music. In 2001, Jobs made another leadership move based on his intuition. While other computer manufacturers were pursuing PDAs, he was looking at music. And when an independent contractor and hardware expert named Tony Fadell approached Apple with an idea of an MP3 player and a music sales company, Apple embraced it, even though several other companies had rejected it. Fadell was hired on, and they began working on what would eventually be known as the iPad. Jobs' involvement with the iPod is an indication of his leadership intuition. Ben Noss, who was on the inside of the project, says, The interesting thing about the iPod is that since it started, it had 100% of Steve Jobs' time. Not many projects get that. He was heavily involved in every single aspect of the project. Why did Jobs do this? Because his intuition as a leader made him understand the impact that the device could make. It was consistent with his vision for creating a digital lifestyle. Jobs has been right on. Sales have been phenomenal and have exceeded the company's computer sales. Apple was making a profit while other technology companies suffered. By spring of 2002, Apple had shipped more than 10 million units. By the end of 2005, Apple possessed 75% of the world market for digital music players. Jobs' story is a reminder that leadership is really more art than science. The principles of leadership are constant, but the application changes with every leader in every situation. That's why it requires intuition. Without it, leaders get blindsided, and that's one of the worst things that can happen to a leader. If you want to lead strong, lead long, lead well, and stay ahead of others, you've got to obey the law of intuition.